Today on Your Money, we're talking backup plans, how to make sure you have enough money in case of emergencies, advice from experts about building a good financial cushion. Plus, is it better to have your savings account and checking account at different banks? We'll show you what a high-interest savings account is all about and steps you can take right now to build your savings. It's all right here on Your Money. Welcome to Your Money. I'm your host, Gordon Severson, here to help you save, spend, and invest your money wisely. Today we're talking saving, particularly when it comes to an emergency fund. With inflation still causing financial pains for many Americans, it can be difficult to save enough money to cover an emergency. Let's start with where our money is going. With current inflation, it seems that we never have enough money left over at the end of the month. Chris Radcliffe talked to a professional to find out where our excess money is going.
When doing budgets and looking at things with clients and looking at the finances and looking at the overall picture, the number one that I've seen, and there may be other advisors that are different or planners that are different, but the number one I've seen is food. And I wouldn't necessarily say they're wasting money on it, but the increase has been seen with food.
And financial advisor Rolandis Johnson is right on the money. According to the Wall Street Journal, in 2022, Americans spent 11.3% of disposable income on food. That was a 30-year high, up from just 5%.
Now, you have your other staples on that list, entertainment, shopping, things like that. They're going to always be there because those are luxury items that we partake in. But food has increased by so much, and that's where a lot of budgets are suffering right now, because you have a $300 budget maybe 3 years ago that was fine, but that $300 budget now has increased to $400 to maybe $500 a month.
And why do we think that is? Well, Rojo says it's not just the goods, it's also the services.
Eating out and delivery services, their prices have increased, almost doubled over the last couple of years. So food has been the biggest culprit of budget downfall so far.
Rolandis told me that one of the best things that you can do for your budget is to have that emergency fund, so that with things getting so much more expensive, one thing won't derail you.
Well, that's the smartest thing, if you ask me. That's one of the things in the budget I know I don't compromise on, because emergencies happen. And so having that emergency fund is absolutely the smartest thing you can have these days. I know everybody's percentage or number is going to be different, but you got to have it. That's something that's a you can't compromise on having that emergency fund or whatever you call it, but you can't compromise on having that.
According to Bankrate, about 70% of adults in the U.S. say they are comfortable with their emergency savings and have enough to cover at least 3 months of expenses. Now, having a financial safety net is easier said than done. A good place to start is being frugal. Jane Monreal heard from an expert who explains how to make changes in your spending habits that actually stick.
It prepares you for the unexpected. In life, and everybody knows this person, it seems like they go from one emergency to the next.
He says the priority should be to have an emergency fund with 3 to 6 months of living expenses. It might feel counterintuitive to do that before paying off credit cards, but he says it gives you more options.
If you'd have done the emergency fund first, now the credit card's paid off, you can go to the emergency fund, handle the emergency, and then refill the emergency fund without going in debt.
So, where is your money going? Henry says the first place to check is your automatic withdrawals. It's convenient for basic expenses, but can make you fall into a trap when it comes to all the extras.
But what about all the other stuff? The streaming services. You have 12 of them. You haven't turned on one of them in 6 months. You don't need it.
Another good tip, don't carry a balance on your credit cards, but use rewards programs to your benefit.
If you can, and you know you can pay it off every month, and you only put in things on there like groceries. I put them all on a credit card. Why? I have a credit card. You have to research, but I have one that gives me 5 times points on groceries.
If you struggle with paying it off, Henry says it's best to avoid using a credit card, but don't close it since that can lower your credit score. Say you do cut down on unnecessary expenses and still don't have wiggle room, what then?
Then if we still don't have room in the spending plan for doing the emergency fund and stuff, let's talk about what job we're going to get next. Can we deliver pizzas at night? Can we be a DoorDash? Can we do this? Can we Uber? What are we going to do to create extra cash flow to develop a proper spending plan in our lives?
Henry says the goal is to have better financial stability, which lowers stress and makes you better prepared for an emergency. It also helps to create better investment opportunities to make your money grow. Now, if I'm at the store and I see something that catches my eye, or one of my kids sees a game that they just have to have, being frugal isn't always at the front of my mind. Jerry Carnes shows us how keeping our savings and checking accounts at different banks could actually help with those impulse purchases.
Balancing your finances can be like walking a tightrope. Some people need a safety net. Others actually do better without one. Keeping your savings and checking accounts in one bank can provide that safety net. But just like that tightrope walker, some do better without the net.
It is an individual basis based on basically impulse control.
Let's look at the reasons why you might want to consider keeping your checking and savings accounts at separate banks. Dr. Michael Thomas of UGA's College of Family and Consumer Sciences says linking your checking and savings accounts at one bank provides a sense of security. Should you overdraw on your checking, your savings account is there to catch you. But there's a downside.
It can trigger them to feel as if, oh, I have plenty of money and I can make plenty of mistakes this month without consequence.
Dr. Thomas says the impulsive spender might be better off if the two accounts are kept from one another.
Take that savings, place it in an account that's out of sight and out of mind. Literally what happens is that if we get into a good rhythm, we kind of forget that that money's there, and we learn how to operate on what we have.
Your bank might offer an attractive package for a checking account, but not the best interest rate on savings.
It is always the optimal financial strategy to actually search around for what is the best rate. What are the highest interest rates being earned?
There are banks that offer perks for keeping both your savings and checking accounts under one roof. They might waive some fees or offer lower interest rates on loans.
So just like shopping around for a good deal on a car or groceries, spreading out your accounts to more than one bank could give you a better bang for your buck. It isn't just the types of bank that affect your money, though. It also is the type of savings account that you use. And when it comes to saving, it's all about the interest rate. Laura Painter heard from a finance expert about why opening a money market account could help make you more money on the money you already have.
Want to make sure that people have their rainy day money.
If there's one dollars and cents goal to start the new year with, it's opening a savings account.
It's important to know you've got your security blanket, you have your easily accessible cash that's not going anywhere and that is insured.
One kind of savings account you'll want to consider is a money market account. They typically offer higher interest rates than basic savings accounts. The higher the rate, the faster your money grows. I did some digging and found most money market accounts offer interest rates of 3 to 5%. Compare that to basic savings accounts offering 0.01%.
If you have $100,000 earning 1% versus $100,000 earning 5%, that's a $4,000 a year difference in interest.
Think of your money market account as another tool in your financial arsenal, along with a checking account and basic savings account.
And yet still don't rock the boat. Keep your checking account open if you're used to it and comfortable with that. But with the bigger amounts of money that you have in savings, well, go out and find a better rate and get more interest into your pocket.
And don't be afraid to read the fine print.
How difficult is it to move the money? Open an account? How do you fill out the paperwork? How do you connect accounts electronically?
Joseph says make sure the bank you choose is insured by the FDIC. That way your money is protected if the bank goes out of business or mismanages their money. Coming up after the break, we'll hear from a woman who talks about emergency funds every day, helping clients who are in some of the most difficult financial situations imaginable. Her advice on how to start an emergency fund and how much you actually need to cover any type of emergency. Stay tuned to Your Money. We are sticking with this theme of emergency funds here on Your Money, and I thought it would be helpful to bring in someone who talks about emergency funds pretty much on a daily basis. I have Kim Miller here from Lutheran Social Service. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yes, thanks for having me.
And I'm sure this is something that you and your colleagues talk about with your clients every day.
Yes, people come in because they are looking for a change. Things are getting tight in their finances, and there's not enough money to go around to last the month. And so they come in to see us to see, what could be done to free up some more money, to create some savings and pay down their debt.
And one of the reasons why I really wanted to do this episode is some of the statistics that are out there that talk about how many people struggle to get emergency funds, emergency savings accounts going. And so here's some statistics that might shock a lot of you. Is Bank Rates shows that 56% of Americans do not have enough money saved up to cover a $1,000 emergency. So car accident, a car repair, 56%, more than half, don't have enough money to cover that $1,000 expense. Empower says a study showed 21%, 1 in 5 Americans, have no emergency savings at all. And the Federal Reserve of St. Louis says data suggests that about 62% of American households are living paycheck to paycheck. So if that's the situation you're in, you are in the majority of Americans right now.
Yes, you are not alone in this situation. We see people all the time that are coming in. Maybe they had a change in income or an increase in living expenses throughout the past couple of years, and people have turned to credit cards or other lines of credit to kind of supplement their income. And at this point, then it gets to the point where, oh man, like all these monthly payments are coming due. What do we do? And then emergency strikes, and then they're stuck trying to figure out, what to do next.
And one of the reasons why an emergency fund is so important, as you and I were talking earlier, is that if you don't have that money set aside for when an emergency happens, the options you have are left to you are all not good options. They're all high interest options. How can people approach that situation if they don't have emergency savings saved up?
So to start off with, if you don't have emergency savings, we encourage people to take a look at their community and their family and friends and the resources around them to see if there's ways to get support that way. Sometimes there is food support that people can get to save money on groceries. Also, one big thing is if you owe someone directly, let's say it's a healthcare system or another bill or a utility that you're behind, just call the creditor directly to see what kind of payment plans may be offered. So people are surprised that sometimes, the squeaky wheel gets the grease type of thing. They call and they demand payment. But sometimes if you ask, hey, what kind of hardship plan do you have? Or you can chop it up into monthly payments so the money that you owe is not so large in the beginning. And a lot of times you're able to have a payment plan at little to no additional cost. And so that can at least ease the burden and give you some time to find the extra find the extra money later on.
And that's all of those are much better options than putting it onto credit cards,
yes,
or payday loans or things like that.
Expensive online loans. It may seem like a relief in the beginning, but that ends up being, just something that will weigh you down later because the cost of the interest and the payment will just reduce your cash flow even further, creating more emergency down the line.
And I know people might be thinking, like $500 or $1,000, it's a lot of money and a lot of people don't have that saved up, but they're like, is that really going to be the thing that makes people's finances fall off a cliff? I'm sure when you talk with your colleagues and clients, sometimes it starts with just a few $100s that is unexpected,
yes,
and that can be enough to spiral out of control.
Yes, and sometimes there are things that I called planned emergencies that can throw people off. It's stuff that we know that pops up every year, and it still catches us by surprise. It's back to school supplies, it's clothing, it's the bill that's due every 3 months, it's auto insurance that's sometimes due every 6 months. And so, we know these emergencies are coming, and then, or these bills are coming, and then, oh man, we just don't have the money set aside. So, sometimes that can snowball then into a bigger emergency of you get sick, you get your hours reduced, and then all of a sudden, then you're stuck, with being behind on your bills.
There's a lot of information out there, different numbers about emergency funds and how much you should have saved up. What's some good advice on a number to shoot for people, how much they should have saved up?
Well, the common thing is always, having $1,000 set aside in savings. And as we learned that a lot of people just don't have that. And so I'm always of the the rule that any little bit is better than nothing. So today is always a good day to start your savings. Even having a couple $100s can help prevent an emergency and help you stay more financially resilient to be able to weather income fluctuations or an occasional emergency that may throw you off. And so even having studies are showing even a couple $100 in emergency savings can help weather financial storms.
And I know, and then you can help, getting built up to some of the recommendations are like, 3 to 6 months of living expenses, things like that. But I think 1,000 is a great starting block to that.
Yes, and for someone who does not have any savings, just even setting up an automatic transfer of just $20 a month, trying to set aside, or if you deal with cash, every time you see a $5 bill, set it aside in an envelope, and start building up slowly over time. Having that emergency savings not only allows you that. It reduces your financial stress in case something pops up, but allows you to take advantage of future sales, let's say buying things in bulk, which allows you then to set aside more money in savings, and it can kind of build that momentum that way.
And I'm a big fan of, those automatic payments to yourself because, people might be thinking like, oh, can I really afford this payment to myself? What if I need it? It's still your money.
Right.
You can access it when you need it, but having it out of sight, out of mind, you're less likely to spend it and see it as money you can spend in your day-to-day life.
That's a great tip. You can even adjust your paycheck sometimes to go to a separate savings account. You can set up an automatic transfer. You can do a lot of different things. And sometimes it's a matter of, looking through your living expenses and just kind of seeing what kind of thing might I cut out temporarily. I think the key is temporarily. Sometimes when we're building savings, we think this change needs to happen for the rest of my life. But at the same time, because we are on a monthly subscription basis, we're not tied to contracts anymore. So what are some things that we could temporarily cut back to set aside money, and then when we have that savings cushion, we can add it back in? Or you may find that you don't miss it at all, and then you can continue to move forward that way.
When you talk to people, what are some of the first things you mention to them about things they can cut out of their monthly expenses to try to find that money to get an emergency savings account going?
Yeah, so a lot of times people come with their budget or their spending plan kind of in their head. They kind of know the big bills that are coming out. And so what we like to focus on is maybe their last couple of weeks of spending. We take a look at bank statements or their cash apps and their transactions that way, and we kind of say, what kind of patterns are we seeing? So sometimes it's just an automatic, okay, maybe we can cut back on this one area, or we focus on one category. But a lot of times too, it's to build savings, it's also to acknowledge that our time has limits too. And sometimes we exchange our time to save the money too. So, or we pay that premium. So sometimes we go out to eat because we're tired and we don't want to, make a meal or do meal planning. Yeah. So then the opposite then would be, are there ways that I can readjust my schedule to free up that time to grocery plan, to make one extra meal a week, to avoid having to eat out? That is a lot of times when I work with people, those small different one-time changes that they can make that then again builds momentum to set aside that money for savings.
Yeah, we hear some of like the classics, like the daily latte. Get rid of that to save that $5-6, or not eat out at lunch or not eat at dinner. But I'm sure there are situations where you're looking at the person's finances and go, there really isn't anything we can cut here.
Right, yeah.
And that's when you have to have a really more difficult conversation, because then it's like something has to change, because there isn't any fat to cut out. It's all bills that you're kind of obligated to pay unless you change something.
Yes, and so that's where, it's not everyone has that luxury of things to cut out, and so then it's a matter of, are there other alternatives that might be cheaper, as far as exploring different bills or different options, or then again, when it comes to our time, are there ways to increase income? A lot of times, for a lot of people who are on fixed incomes and there's not a whole lot of things to adjust in their day-to-day life, then we have to look for what are some extra windfalls that might be coming in. So around this time, people in Minnesota are getting property tax refunds. And so that might be an opportunity then to jumpstart savings. Or we start looking at, what are some times a year where you might have the opportunity to earn a little money here and there. And so that's where you can set aside that money too in savings.
One thing I was kind of curious about is, like, when you're talking with people, what kind of dollar figures are you talking about with getting started? Like, is it like usually like, hey, let's start with $10 a week, or $50 a month, or like what kind of numbers are you typically talking with people just to get started?
I think it depends on the person. With someone who might be working and has a little bit more flexibility, sometimes we encourage, $25 a month. That is, $300 for the year, or $50 a month. And so that might be a good goal. And then again, if they need to use it, then they can have access to the savings. But sometimes even setting aside even a couple dollars a week makes a difference. Again, I used to work with someone who, their goal was to buy toilet paper and their household goods in bulk. And so they were able to set aside a couple dollars a week in an envelope, and then they were able to build up to $20 and then $50 in savings, and that makes all the difference. So again, it does vary by everybody, but I would say just a little bit, something that you can set aside is better than nothing, and that represents that opportunity then to be able to weather that emergency in the future.
For sure. That's really interesting about just something simple as buying in bulk, because just saving up that money, like I've done stories and talking with people who are homeless, and I hear from them is like, things you take for granted, like not being able to cook your own food, they're forced to be eating more food that is more expensive, going to places, trying to go to fast food places or things like that, because they don't have the infrastructure to more cheaply cook their food. And so there's things like that, like just saving up $100 to be able to buy something in bulk. It sounds little, but it can add up over time.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for giving us these great advice, great tips here. Hopefully we shared something with our viewers that can help them get started or share some advice with people in their life.
Yeah, thank you.
Coming up after the break, high-yield savings accounts. What are they, and what are the positives and negatives in getting one? Plus 5 things you can do right now to build your emergency fund. Welcome back to Your Money. No doubt you have heard the term high-yield savings account before, but many people don't know how they actually work. Steve Steger looked at some of the pros and cons of starting a high-yield savings account.
Savings account.
If you spent any time online,
build your wealth.
You've heard the buzz about high-yield savings account.
Best believe my money's gonna work for me.
For those of us of a certain age, it sounds tempting. We're used to savings accounts that pay pennies, not dollars in interest.
Frankly, money in a savings account wasn't doing a whole lot more than money sitting in a jar, right?
Eric Crom is the president of Clear Creek Advisors and a certified financial planner. We asked him the first question, what is a high-yield savings account?
It's really no different than your general savings account.
It's just as liquid as a traditional savings account, meaning you have access to your money just like you would there. And instead of the traditional savings account that offers an interest rate on average of about 0.4%, these accounts offer anywhere from 4 to 6% APY.
And as we felt inflation come hard, and we were dealing with the negative impacts of that from an expense standpoint, one of the silver linings is that we can now make some money on our safe investments.
Crom says these accounts are protected just as much as your traditional savings accounts. The FDIC covers up to $250,000.
Every dollar you have, you might as well get as much as you can.
The cons, you're usually only going to find rates like this at an online bank, which can make some people uncomfortable.
The reality is online institutions probably have less overhead than brick and mortar, so they're paying more.
And that 4 to 6% return rate may not last forever if the feds lower interest rates this year.
These accounts don't offer the same high returns that you might get in the stock market or with other types of investments. So you shouldn't put all of your life savings into a high-yield savings account. But for some short-term saving, like an emergency fund, it is a great option. Preparing for an emergency isn't just about money, though. That money has to be accessible, and you should be mentally prepared for an emergency as well. Sharon Coe breaks down the 5 things you can do to make sure you are ready for any emergency.
First up, check your subscriptions.
Think about the Hulus, the Netflix, all the things you subscribe to, and ask yourself, where do I get the biggest benefit from? And what I get the lowest benefit from, you cut it. But the key is to take those savings and put it toward the highest interest debt you've got. That way you have something to show for what you've saved.
Financial expert Derek Kinney says that leads into number 2.
And the goal here is you want to be the CEO of your dollars. Without direction, your dollars can be pretty unruly and have some behavior problems. You want to make sure you direct them to go where you want them to go.
Third tip, cut commoditized items.
In Texas, we can choose our electricity provider. You can choose your homeowner's insurance, automobile insurance, renter's insurance. All of those, for the most part, except for really good customer service, are pretty much the same. So in my book, I talk about Good Money Revolution. How can you call those companies and say, look, I'm thinking about changing. Do you have any kind of a new customer special or a deal?
Next up, visit your mortgage.
Call your current mortgage provider and say, look, I'm considering changing. Is there a deal you have, or can you save me on some fees, reduce the interest rate, cut a 30-year down to a 20, and so forth, and see what they say, because they want to keep your business. They'd rather not lose it.
Lastly, make sure any extra bonus is spent wisely. If you don't get the bump,
well, then what you want to do is think about, is this the company I want to stay at? One thing we know is that there's unlimited opportunities. People are hiring, and sometimes the grass is greener. Just because your boss says no, even after your best efforts, another boss may recognize the hidden value you provide and will likely pay you more. And it's a great way to jumpstart some of your savings goals as well.
Those are some great tips, especially checking your subscriptions. It feels like every service these days has a subscription, and it's hard to keep track of them all. Netflix, Disney Plus, Costco. I can only imagine how much money is wasted on unused subscription services. That's all we have today on Your Money. Remember, when it comes to an emergency fund, start small. You heard it from our experts. Even $20 a week is a great start. It takes a little discipline and planning, but it's much better than dealing with the added stress of going through an emergency without having any money set aside to pay for it. I'm Gordon Severson, helping you save, spend, and invest your money wisely. I'll see you next time.